The CEO's return. Destruction by indifference. Stop. Before this story of ultimate justice blows your mind, we need a quick favor. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single tale of triumph like this. The beginning that detonated his world. What happens when a man, intoxicated by his own ego, publicly humiliates the woman who sacrificed everything for him? He stood there, surrounded by his so-called friends, laughing and labeling his ex-wife, Eleanor Vance, as dowdy and dull. He thought she was a ghost of his past, a forgotten chapter in his ascent to the top. He had no idea he was about to become the biggest nightmare of his future. What he didn't see, just yards away, was a $500,000 Bentley Mulsanne gliding silently to the curb. And in the next 60 seconds, the woman who stepped out of it, escorted by one of Europe's most powerful and enigmatic figures, would not only shatter his pride, she would detonate his entire world. Stay with us as we unpack the incredible, true story of Eleanor Vance, the architect of his ambition. The divorce papers called it irreparable breakdown. For Eleanor Vance, that clinical phrase was a gross understatement. Her marriage hadn't broken. It had been systematically dismantled, piece by piece, by the man she once promised to love forever, Jason Roth. Their life together had been a story written in his font. When they met, Eleanor was a brilliant art history graduate with junior curator offers from 2 prestigious museums. Jason was a junior analyst with a smile that could sell sand in the Sahara and an ambition that burned like a wildfire. He painted her a beautiful picture. "Just let me get established," he whispered, his hand on her cheek. "Just a few years, Ellie. Back me now, and once I make partner, the world is yours. You can open your own gallery. We'll travel. You won't answer to anyone." She believed him. She took a quiet, stable job in university administration, flexible hours and decent benefits, so she could be there for his late nights, host his networking dinners, and edit his presentations. She poured her intellect not into museum catalogs, but into making him look smarter, more polished. Her dream was shelved, carefully placed on a high shelf to be dusted off later, but later never came. As Jason climbed the ranks at the London-based finance firm, Gala Capital, his suits became more expensive, and his compliments grew rarer. His support system, once his rock, was now a hindrance. Her love of art, once fascinating, was now a dull hobby. The final blow came when he announced he was leaving her for a 24-year-old Instagram influencer named Chloe Mills, a woman whose main contribution to the world was posting selfies with luxury brand tags. The divorce was brutal and swift. Jason, armed with high-powered lawyers, argued that Eleanor hadn't contributed financially in years. He painted her as a parasite, a simple woman lacking drive. He kept the sprawling Chelsea flat, the investment portfolio, the country club membership. She was left with her modest savings, a used Honda, and a court-mandated alimony barely insulting enough to be offensive. 18 months later, Eleanor was living the life Jason had designed for her in her absence, the life of a dowdy and dull woman. She lived in a small, one-bedroom apartment in a cramped East London suburb, the radiators hissing in winter and the window air conditioner rattling in summer. The ambitious, vibrant woman had faded, replaced by a ghost haunting the periphery of her own life. She worked as a remote academic researcher for a university, a job that paid the bills but killed her soul. Her world had shrunk to the size of her laptop screen. The highlight of her week was visiting the National Gallery, not as a curator, but as a paying guest. The cardinal in the mail. One October afternoon, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived in her mailbox. It stood out among the bills and junk mail like a cardinal in a flock of pigeons. Her name and address were written in elegant script. It was an invitation to the Royal Arts Foundation Grand Gala, the social event of the London season, held at the historic Royal Opera House. Her first instinct was to laugh, a cruel joke. She and Jason had attended every year. It was his stage. He would glide through the room, slapping backs, laughing too loud, with her silently trailing, a beautiful but mute accessory. The invitation was, surely, an administrative error. She was about to toss it when a cold fury, an emotion she hadn't felt in months, pricked her heart. She imagined Jason there, with Chloe clinging to his arm. She could hear his smug voice, presenting his new, upgraded life to his colleagues. She could picture their pitying glances if they saw her, the discarded wife. The thought churned her stomach. The envelope sat on her small kitchen counter. For 3 days it mocked her. "Throw it away!" her mind screamed. "It's an invitation to your own humiliation." But on the 4th day, something shifted. Looking at her reflection in the dark screen of her monitor, she no longer saw a ghost. She saw a prisoner, and she realized Jason wasn't just her ex-husband. He was her jailer, and her prison was the shame he had so skillfully constructed around her. He still controlled her, even from afar. The fear of seeing him, of being judged by him, was just another bar on her cage. A strange, unfamiliar resolve began to bubble up from deep within. This wasn't about revenge. This was about reclamation. Audience interaction. If you were Eleanor, would you have thrown away the invitation and avoided the drama? Or would you have chosen to confront your past in public? Let us know your answer in the comments. We read every one. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over a number she hadn't dialed in nearly a year. A name that represented a world she thought she had left behind forever. She took a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and stale coffee, and pressed dial. "Adrian," her voice said, a little shaky. "It's Eleanor Vance. I know this is unexpected, but I have a proposition for you. And I need a favor." On the other end of the line, in a minimalist penthouse overlooking Regent's Park, the reclusive tech billionaire, Adrian Lawson, a man who hadn't attended a public event in 5 years, smiled. "Eleanor," he said, his voice quiet and warm. "I wondered when you'd call. Tell me everything." The silent partner Adrian Lawson was a myth in the world of technology and finance. He had built Logos, a data synthesis algorithm so revolutionary it had restructured global logistics, making him a billionaire before 30. But unlike his peers who bought sports teams and mega yachts, Adrian had withdrawn. He hated the spotlight. His true passion, the one thing he poured his fortune into, was art. He was a preservationist, a digital archivist. He had met Eleanor through her words. 2 years before her divorce, Eleanor had spent her nights and weekends writing a long-form academic paper. It was a brilliant analysis on the decay of Renaissance frescoes, proposing a radical new methodology for digital restoration using predictive modeling based on chemical composition. She sent it to a niche art conservation journal, expecting no reply. Adrian, an avid reader of such journals, came across her article. He was stunned. It wasn't just the idea. It was the elegance of her prose, the fierce intelligence that connected disparate fields, art, chemistry, data, in a way he had only dreamed of. They began a correspondence. It was purely professional, a meeting of 2 powerful intellects, but it was the most stimulating intellectual connection Eleanor had experienced in years. For a few hours a week, emailing Adrian, she wasn't Jason Roth's wife. She was Eleanor Vance, the academic. The correspondence had faded as her marriage spiraled towards its final, ugly demise. After the divorce, too lost and adrift, Eleanor hadn't thought to call. She was too ashamed. But Adrian hadn't forgotten. He had quietly looked into her situation. He was offended by the waste of talent, seeing it squandered by a petulant fool like Jason Roth. "A proposition and a favor?" Adrian repeated, his voice devoid of surprise. "I'm listening," Eleanor explained, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. She told him about the gala, her initial fear, and her new resolve. "The favor is, I was hoping you could attend with me. I know you don't do these things, and it's an absurd request, but I'll be there," he said without hesitation. "The proposition," she continued. "This is the leap. Your company, Lawson Industries, has the processing power. I have the methodology. Together, we could build the world's most advanced art preservation archive, a digital library of Alexandria for the masters. We could create a non-profit foundation, the Lawson Vance Archive, to fund and manage it. This gala is the perfect venue to announce it. It's full of patrons, museum directors, the very people we need on board." There was a long silence on the line. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She had overreached. "Eleanor," Adrian finally said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I've had a team of 50 engineers trying to crack the practical application of your paper for the last 6 months. They've barely made progress. I wasn't going to launch a pale imitation of your idea. I wanted the architect. I was already planning to fly to London next week to offer you the position of executive director, CEO of the entire project." Eleanor sank onto her old, worn sofa, tears welling up. Not tears of sadness or shame, but of pure, unadulterated relief. Someone had seen her. Someone had seen her all along. The midnight blue dress. The next 10 days were a whirlwind of purpose. Adrian's chief of staff, Clara, arranged for a high-end wardrobe, a suite at the Ritz Hotel for the night of the event, and a top stylist. "This isn't a personal gift, Eleanor," Clara explained gently. "It's a corporate expense. You are representing the foundation. You need to look the part." The stylist, a chic woman named Anika, arrived with rolling racks of designer gowns. She saw the woman who had been buried. They chose a midnight blue silk column dress that flowed over her figure, with a single, dramatic sweep of fabric over one shoulder. It was understated, but utterly commanding. It was the dress of a woman who didn't need sequins to shine. The night before the gala, she found an old photo album. She saw a picture of herself and Jason. He was smiling, his arm possessively around her waist. She looked happy, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She was an accessory, a lovely, well-kept possession. She closed the album and put it away. That woman was gone. Tomorrow night, she wouldn't be anyone's accessory. She was the main exhibit, the predator and the paragon. Jason Roth checked his reflection in the gold leaf-framed mirror of his penthouse. His bespoke tuxedo fit like a second skin. His new luxury watch, which he couldn't quite afford but deemed essential, gleamed. Tonight was critical. He needed to project success more than ever. "Babe, does this filter make me look too tan or more jaundiced?" Chloe Mills called from the living room, crammed into a garish rose-gold sequin dress. "You look incredible, darling," he said, adjusting his tie, his mind on securing a new hedge fund. "I can't wait for everyone to see us," Chloe said, practicing her pout. "That blogger from London Social will be there. We need a perfect picture. Remember what happened to Eleanor that year, when she spilled wine on the councilman's wife? God, how embarrassing for you." Jason smirked. Eleanor was from another era. Sweet, but, dull. She belonged in a library, not a ballroom. Leaving her had been the best decision he'd ever made. The entrance to the Royal Opera House was a controlled storm of flashing cameras. Jason, with Chloe attached to his arm, exited their hired car. He saw his targets near the grand staircase, a former colleague and his wife, and steered Chloe in their direction. This was a perfect opportunity to court a little favor. "Billy, my man, looking sharp," Jason boomed, clapping William a little too hard on the back. After air kisses and empty compliments, William leaned in. "So, Jason, haven't seen you since the merger talks. Heard things got a bit rocky." Jason waved a dismissive hand. "Paper tigers, Billy. You know how it is. Gotta spend money to make money." He needed to change the subject. And then he saw her. Standing near the less crowded guest registry, almost hidden behind a marble pillar, was Eleanor. She was alone. He couldn't make out the details of what she wore, only that it was dark and simple. She looked exactly as he had pictured, lost, out of place. A wallflower at the biggest party of the year. A wave of vengeful pity washed over him. How pathetic. "Oh my God, is that Eleanor?" Chloe stammered, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "She looks so sad. And what is she even wearing?" This was his moment. With his audience of William, Brenda, and Chloe hanging on his every word, Jason let the self-satisfied smile he'd been holding back finally take over. He lowered his voice to a theatrical, conspiratorial whisper, just loud enough for those nearby to clearly hear. "I almost feel bad for her," he began, shaking his head slowly. "When we were married, I tried to get her interested in life. But she was always happiest with her dusty old books. I'm glad she's out of the house, I suppose. But some people just aren't cut out for this world. She's a sweet girl, but honestly, totally dowdy and dull." He felt a surge of superiority. He had defined her. He had put her back in the box he had created for her. The narrative was secure. The ice-cold indifference. Eleanor had been waiting for Clara's text, and then she heard it. His voice cut through the ambient chatter of the lobby like a shard of glass. Dowdy and dull. The words echoed in the grand hall, but felt like they were whispered directly into her ear. For a split second, the old Eleanor resurfaced. Shame washed over her, hot and suffocating. Her first instinct was to turn and flee. But then, something else happened. The heat of shame instantly vaporized by the white-hot fire of pure, undiluted rage. Not just rage at Jason, but rage at herself, for ever allowing this man to have so much power over her. Dull? She had debated 17th century art patronage with one of the most brilliant minds on the planet. Dowdy? She was about to become the CEO of a world-changing multi-million-dollar foundation. He hadn't just misjudged her. He was living in a completely different reality. The moment her fear vanished, it was replaced by a chilling calm. This wasn't her test. It was his. A text message vibrated in her small handbag. It was from Clara. One word. Now. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and stepped out from behind the pillar into the light. Just as Jason finished his smug pronouncement, a new energy rippled through the entrance lobby. The frantic energy of the paparazzi suddenly surged with a renewed, almost frenzied intensity. A murmur ran through the crowd. A sleek, long Bentley Mulsanne, painted in a custom shade of graphite, pulled up. It was a car that screamed that it didn't need to be loud to announce its owner's wealth. Probably some old money dinosaur, Jason muttered. But William wasn't listening. He, like everyone else, was watching the Bentley. The driver opened the rear passenger door. An impeccably polished Oxford shoe emerged, followed by a man who unfolded himself from the car with easy grace. It was Adrian Lawson, the mythical tech recluse here at the gala. It was impossible. Adrian Lawson didn't even glance at the noisy press. He simply turned to the open door and extended his hand, and then time seemed to slow. A woman's hand, elegant and unadorned, took his. She emerged from the car, not as a starlet, but as a queen. The midnight blue silk of her dress flowed around her. She looked directly ahead, her eyes calm and focused. Jason felt a physical punch to the gut. His brain couldn't process the image. The Eleanor in his mind, the dowdy and dull woman, simply could not coexist with the vision of power and elegance now walking toward him. Is she with him? Chloe stammered, her own carefully constructed facade crumbling. The Instagram influencer suddenly looked cheap and desperate next to Eleanor's timeless grace. Adrian Lawson placed a light, respectful hand on the small of Eleanor's back and guided her toward the entrance. They moved as a unit, a formidable, silent team. The sea of people instinctively parted for them. The gala chairman, a portly, important man named Mr. Howard Davenport, rushed over, his face beaming. "Mr. Lawson, what an incredible honor. We had no idea you were coming." Adrian smiled politely. "Thank you for having us, Howard," he said. Then he gestured to Eleanor. "And please allow me to introduce my partner, Eleanor Vance." They walked past Jason's small group without a flicker of recognition. Eleanor's eyes didn't even graze him. To her, he was just part of the scenery, as insignificant as a potted fern. The cut was so deep, so absolute. It was more devastating than any shout or public confrontation. It wasn't hate. It was indifference. It was erasure. Jason stood frozen, his champagne glass halfway to his lips. The smug smile was gone, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed disbelief and nascent horror. In the space of 30 seconds, his entire world had been turned upside down. The woman he had just publicly labeled a pathetic failure had arrived with one of the planet's richest, most enigmatic men, looking not like his discarded past, but like everyone's future. The final announcement at 9:30, Mr. Davenport took the stage. After the usual thanks, his voice acquired a new level of excitement. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special unannounced guest tonight, a visionary who has reshaped the digital world, and tonight he is here to share a new vision with us. It is my immense privilege to welcome Mr. Adrian Lawson." Adrian Lawson walked to the podium. "Thank you, Howard. I'm here tonight because we are at a precipice. For centuries, our greatest art treasures have been at the mercy of time, war, and decay. Masterpieces fade. We believe technology can change that." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Tonight, I am proud to announce the formation of the Lawson Vance Archive." The name hit Jason like a physical blow. Lawson Vance. Not just his date, not just his companion. Her name was on the marquee alongside the billionaires. "But an idea is only as good as the mind that conceived it," Adrian continued, his voice resonating with genuine admiration. "And the architectural vision, the genius behind this entire methodology is not mine. It belongs to an academic of extraordinary talent and foresight. It is my great honor to introduce the founding CEO of the Lawson Vance Archive, Ms. Eleanor Vance." The spotlight found Eleanor as she rose from her seat and walked to the podium. The entire room was silent, captivated. "Thank you, Adrian," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Art is not a luxury. It is our collective memory. For too long, that history has been fragile." She spoke for 5 minutes, painting a future so compelling, so brilliant, that the entire room was spellbound. She spoke of art, data, and legacy with a passion and intelligence that was breathtaking. When she finished, the room erupted in a thunderous standing ovation. Museum directors, philanthropists, and investors were already flocking around her. Jason stumbled towards the terrace, desperate for air. Everything was a lie. His entire perception of his marriage, of her, was a fiction he had written to soothe his own ego. She hadn't been dull. She had been bored. Bored with him. Bored with the small, suffocating box he had put her in. The coward's confession. He was gasping for breath when a voice spoke behind him. Quite the turn of events, Roth. It was Howard Davenport, the gala chairman. I had no idea, Jason stammered. Davenport took a slow sip of his whiskey. You know what's funny? I remember her. From years ago. She applied for the senior curator position at the Museum of Contemporary Art. Her file came across my desk. She was, by a wide margin, the most brilliant candidate we'd seen in a decade. Jason's heart stopped. We were going to offer her the job, Davenport continued, his voice turning cold. But then we got a call. From you. You told my predecessor that you were about to get a big promotion, and that Eleanor had decided she wanted to focus on starting a family. You said she was withdrawing her application to support your career, and that she was no longer ambitious for that type of work. You asked him to keep the conversation confidential to spare her the embarrassment. The memory, deliberately buried for years, returned to Jason with sick clarity. He had made that call. He had been terrified that if she got the job, she would eclipse him. She would have her own power. She might not need him anymore. You didn't just divorce her, Roth, Davenport said, his voice laced with contempt. You sabotaged her career out of petty jealousy. And now look at her. Turns out, you can't keep a mind like that suppressed forever. The only thing holding her back was you. Davenport finished his whiskey and left Jason alone in the cold night air. The final detonation had occurred. Not only was his pride shattered, his entire sense of self was gone. He wasn't the hero of his own story. He was the villain. And he had just watched his victim rise from the ashes he created, more powerful and brilliant than he could have ever imagined. High-value conclusion. In the end, this was not just a story of revenge. It was a story of reclamation. Eleanor Vance didn't need to destroy Jason Roth. His own character did it for him. Her victory wasn't arriving in a Bentley. It was rediscovering the woman brilliant enough to earn that seat. It is a powerful reminder that the most damaging opinions are often the ones we internalize from people who are terrified of our own potential. Eleanor's story shows us that, sometimes, the greatest act of defiance is not to strike back, but simply to become everything you were told you could not be. Final call to action. What did you think of Eleanor's incredible journey? Was Jason's fall karma, or did he deserve that precise fate? Let us know your opinion in the comments. We read every one. And if this story of triumph and justice inspired you, be sure to like, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss what comes next. The CEO's return. Destruction by indifference. The morning after the gala, Jason Roth woke up to the aggressive glare of sunlight streaming through his penthouse windows. For a fleeting, merciful moment, he believed the previous night's events were a stress-induced nightmare. Then he saw his discarded tuxedo, and the memory returned with the force of a physical blow. He fumbled for his phone, his thumb trembling as he unlocked it. The screen was a minefield. His news alerts, usually filled with market analyses, were dominated by one story. Bloomberg, Lawson Vance Archive. Launches with $500 million endowment, shakes nonprofit sector. London Social, the woman hidden in plain sight. Eleanor Vance's unveiling. He found his own name buried in the 7th paragraph of the London Social article. It read, Ms. Vance, a brilliant academic whose earlier career was reportedly paused by her prior marriage to mid-level finance manager Jason Roth, is now set to become one of the most influential figures in global arts and culture. Mid-level finance manager. The two words were a death sentence. In his world, titles were everything. The phrase was a public demotion, a deliberate, exquisitely cruel stripping of his entire identity. The real nightmare began when he walked into the offices of Gala Capital at 10 o'clock. The moment he stepped off the elevator, the air was different. The usual bustling energy of the trading floor was muted. People fell silent as he passed. His colleagues, men with whom he had shared drinks and inside jokes just days ago, now found the carpet patterns intensely fascinating. They wouldn't meet his eyes. He was no longer a predator in the jungle. He was a wounded animal. Robert Kensington, the firm's senior partner, was waiting for him in his office. Kensington didn't invite him to sit. He stood by the window, his back to Jason, looking out at the city. "I had a call this morning from Howard Davenport," Kensington said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It was descriptive, about your conduct at the gala, both your public comments about your ex-wife and the history of your past interference in her career." "Robert, that's a misunderstanding. A private matter," Jason began, his voice hoarse. Kensington finally turned, his face granite. "A private matter, Jason? Gala Capital has its name on a wing of that museum. We pride ourselves on integrity. You not only made a fool of yourself, you behaved in a manner so dishonorable, so profoundly unethical, that it reflects on every person in this firm. You sabotaged a brilliant woman's career out of sheer, pathetic ego." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like poison. "And on top of that, your high-risk fund just cost us 7 million euros. Your professional judgment is as bankrupt as your character." The ultimatum was simple and brutal. Resign before noon with a meager severance package and an ironclad confidentiality agreement, or be fired for cause with a full public audit of his disastrous operations. At 11:45 a.m., Jason Roth was carrying his career in a cardboard box, walking out of the building he once thought he would one day rule. The unraveling. He arrived home to find the penthouse in a state of chaotic frenzy. Expensive suitcases lay open, overflowing with Chloe's designer clothes and shoes. She was on the phone with her mother, her back to him. "I know, Mom. It's a complete disaster. He's a total fraud. My brand can't survive this kind of humiliation." She hung up and finally faced him. Her expression was not sadness or sympathy, but pure reptilian fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she shrieked. "We're a joke. That blogger is already writing about the smug banker and his Instagram model girlfriend who got put in their place. My followers are dropping. My sponsors are calling. You were supposed to be my ticket up, Jason, not an anchor dragging me to the bottom." "Chloe, we can fix this," he pleaded. "Can we?" She laughed, a high, ugly sound. "There is no we. I'm not sinking with your ship. You're not angry you were cruel to Eleanor. You're just angry that you lost. You don't bet on losers. And right now, you are the biggest loser in London." She zipped her final suitcase, the sound echoing the finality of her words. She didn't even glance back as she walked out the door, leaving him alone in the monument to a life that was no longer his. Interaction point. The price of pride. Jason lost his penthouse, his club membership, and his friends almost overnight. He ended up in a dingy flat in a suburb he used to fly over without a second thought. Question: what do you believe was the true moment Jason lost everything? A. When Eleanor stepped out of the Bentley, or B. when his own mother mentor found out about the sabotage? Comment below with your choice and why. The Last Witness. Weeks later, driven by a desperate, morbid need for final confirmation of his own demise, Jason found the address of the Lawson Vance archive. He stood across the street from the elegant glass-fronted building, feeling like a ghost haunting a future in which he had no part. Finally, he saw her. She walked out the main door, engaged in an animated conversation with Adrian Lawson. They were looking at architectural blueprints on a tablet, and she was pointing something out, her face illuminated by a genuine, unforced smile. A smile of pure satisfaction that he had never, not once, been able to elicit. "Eleanor!" he cried out. His own voice sounded alien, thin and reedy. She stopped, her smile fading not into anger, but into a mask of neutral calm. She turned, and Adrian stood at her side, his hand resting lightly on her arm. A silent sentry, a physical representation of the fact that she was no longer unprotected. "Jason," she acknowledged, nothing more. "I needed to see you," he began, the words tumbling out in a pathetic rush. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For what I said that night. That was just my ego, my fear. But it's the other thing. The call to the museum. I was scared, Eleanor. You were so brilliant, and I was terrified you would leave me behind, so I made sure you couldn't. It was monstrous. I was a fool, a coward." Eleanor listened, her expression unreadable. When he finished, the silence stretched long. "Thank you for the apology, Jason," she said, her voice measured and devoid of malice. "I accept it, but I need you to understand I accept it for my own sake, not yours. Forgiveness is the final chain I had to break to truly be free of the prison you built for me." She took a small step forward. "For a decade, I allowed your definition of me to become my reality. When you called me dull, I stopped seeking excitement. When you called my passions a hobby, I treated them as such. The great tragedy of our marriage was not the divorce. It was the slow, systematic death of my spirit, which I willingly participated in, because I thought it was the price of your love." Her gaze was direct, unwavering. "This life I have now," she gestured to the building behind her. "I didn't build it to spite you. I built it on the foundation of the woman I was before I met you, and the woman I became after I left you. My success is not your opposite. It exists on a plane you cannot even comprehend. It is a partnership built on mutual respect, not on fear and control." She gave him one final, brief nod, a gesture of absolute dismissal. "I hope you find some peace, Jason. Goodbye." She turned and walked away with Adrian, their conversation resuming, as if he were nothing more than a crack in the pavement they had momentarily had to step around. Jason Roth stood on the sidewalk as the city churned around him, a man utterly invisible. He watched until she disappeared from view, and the full weight of his reality crashed down. He had called her dowdy, and in doing so, he had orchestrated his own ruin. He had called her dull, and in doing so, he had condemned himself to a life of hollow, meaningless silence. The archive grows, expanding the legacy. 6 months later, the Lawson Vance Archive was a global institution. In a state-of-the-art laboratory in Florence, Italy, Eleanor and Adrian were reviewing the first major project, the digital restoration of a decaying fresco by Ghirlandaio, the very one Eleanor had written about in her academic paper. Adrian, standing beside her, smiled, a rare public display of affection. "The predictive model is flawless. We've retrieved 99.8% of the original color spectrum. We did it, Eleanor. We did it," she confirmed. "And speaking of the future," Adrian continued, his voice taking on a formal tone, "the board has unanimously approved the merger agreement. The Lawson Vance Archive will officially absorb the Lawson Industries' entire Advanced Data Synthesis Division. You will oversee all operations, both artistic and technological. I will retain the role of chairman, focusing on strategic partnerships." Eleanor, now the undisputed leader of a technological and philanthropic empire, accepted the news with the quiet confidence of a general receiving her promotion. "Excellent. We can now greenlight the Latin American initiative. I want to start with the pre-Columbian ceramics. The decay rate is critical. The partnership between the technological visionary and the artistic scholar was seamless. It was built on the mutual understanding that Adrian provided the tools and Eleanor provided the vision and purpose. It was a union of equals, far more formidable than the controlling dynamic Jason had demanded. Later that evening, as they walked through the ancient streets of Florence, Adrian took her hand. The world knows you as the CEO now. But I still remember the academic who wrote that brilliant paper. Eleanor squeezed his hand. The brilliant academic was always there, Adrian. I just needed to stop asking for permission to be her. That is the true legacy of the archive. Not the digital restoration, but the restoration of the self. She looked up at the stars, feeling not the heavy weight of a career paused, but the exhilarating momentum of a future she was actively building. What do you think is next for the CEO, Eleanor Vance? A major political appointment or a personal challenge? Let us know in the comments. If this story of triumph and self-reclamation inspired you, remember to like, share, and subscribe. The CEO's return, destruction by indifference, the new adversary, Professor Axel Brannigan. 2 years passed. The Lawson Vance archive became the gold standard in digital preservation. Its Digital Alexandria project had successfully archived priceless collections from 5 continents, earning Eleanor not just recognition, but legitimate global influence. She moved easily between the ancient halls of the Louvre and the minimalist server rooms of the archive's Zurich headquarters. Her elegance was now a uniform of authority. The new threat emerged not from finance, but from academia, the very world that had once been her refuge. Professor Axel Brannigan, a highly influential, old-guard historian and director of the prestigious London Royal Antiquarian Society, launched a scathing public campaign against the Lawson Vance archive. Brannigan, a man whose word still moved millions in cultural funding, argued that the digital preservation methods advocated by Eleanor were a sterile, technologically driven perversion of history. In a widely circulated article in The Economist, Brannigan wrote, "Ms. Vance is archiving not the object, but a flawless, data-synthesized ghost of the object. She is removing the patina of history, the very evidence of human touch, error, and decay. She is creating a perfect past that never existed. We must fund the physical, tangible preservation, not this emotionless facsimile." His attack was effective. Brannigan represented the powerful moneyed interests who believed that art must be experienced with all its flaws and age. His resistance caused several major European patrons to pause their promised multi-million euro donations to the archive. Eleanor was no longer fighting a personal enemy fueled by ego. She was fighting a philosophical war against entrenched tradition. The gauntlet thrown. The conflict was set to climax at the Global Heritage Summit in Geneva. Both Eleanor and Brannigan were scheduled to deliver keynote addresses on the future of conservation. In preparation, Adrian, now the archive's chairman, watched Eleanor tirelessly prepare her address in their London office. "His argument is strong, Eleanor," Adrian noted, reviewing the data. "He appeals to sentiment. He has the weight of centuries behind him." Eleanor, calm but intense, looked up from her notes. "And I have the truth of tomorrow. Brannigan's approach is a death sentence. It's triage. He's choosing which artifacts get to live. My approach ensures everything survives, flaws and all. The decay he cherishes is merely data to me, data that prevents the next decay." Audience interaction. Professor Brannigan argues for the tangible preservation of art, including its historical decay. Eleanor argues for digital preservation, capturing the artifact in a perfect, archivable state. Which preservation philosophy do you agree with more? Brannigan's traditional view or Eleanor's innovative approach? Tell us why in the comments. "His final attack," Adrian added, "will be on your credibility. He will point out that you are a CEO of a tech-funded organization, not a museum director, suggesting your motivation is profit, not passion." Eleanor gave him a steely look that Jason Roth would have recognized instantly. "Then I will have to remind the world precisely where my passion truly lies." The Geneva Summit. Archiving the soul, The summit hall in Geneva was packed. Brannigan, with his distinguished gray hair and authoritative voice, delivered a stirring, passionate speech that evoked the sanctity of physical artifacts. He ended with a calculated jab. We must not let the future of history be entrusted to the hands of Silicon Valley's technocrats. Eleanor took the podium immediately after. She wore an ivory suit, simple and powerful, a stark contrast to the dramatic blue gown from 2 years prior. Her entrance commanded respect, not shock. She began quietly, displaying an image on the massive screen behind her, not of a perfect fresco, but of a small, cracked, mud-caked ceramic relic from the Latin American initiative. Professor Brannigan speaks eloquently of decay, Eleanor began, her voice gaining strength. He argues that the cracks and chips are the soul of history. I agree. But what if the soul is lost to time? What if the object crumbles into dust? She paused. The artifact you see is 100 years old. It was recovered in pieces. Professor Brannigan's philosophy says we must glue those pieces together, hoping it lasts another decade. Our philosophy says we do more. The screen changed. Using the Logos algorithm, the archive's data model rebuilt the ceramic digitally, not as a perfect facsimile, but as a fully rendered, scientifically accurate digital object, complete with its original pigment and firing defects. We have not removed the decay, Eleanor declared, gesturing to the complex data visualization of the cracks. We have archived the decay. We have made its soul immortal. She then dropped the real bomb. Professor Brannigan questioned my motivation. He suggested that as a CEO, I am driven by profit. I started this project because of a paper I wrote in my spare time, a paper that was almost never seen because my former husband sabotaged my career, fearing my potential. The crowd gasped. The personal revelation was stunning. I am not a tech executive, Eleanor stated, looking directly at a pale Brannigan in the front row. I am a woman who was told to be quiet, who was told her passion was dull, and who was told to step aside for the men who built nothing themselves. I took the tools offered by a true visionary, Adrian Lawson, and built an institution dedicated to preserving what others dismiss. The Lawson Vance Archive is not a business. It is a monument to the things and the people who were almost erased. Her voice softened slightly. We do not seek to control the past. We seek to ensure that no voice, no brushstroke, and no brilliant mind, whether 1,500 years old or only 2 years ago, is ever lost to silence again. When she finished, the room didn't just applaud. They roared. They recognized the authority of her intellect, but they were moved by the power of her redemption. Brannigan's traditional argument collapsed under the weight of her moral and technological authority. The legacy secured. The Global Heritage Summit secured the archive's future. Brannigan's influence waned, and the stalled donations were immediately reactivated. A week later, back in their London office, Adrian smiled across the desk at Eleanor. You didn't just win the debate, Eleanor. You changed the definition of conservation, and you used your entire life as the opening statement. I learned that lesson from Jason, Eleanor replied, a slight humorless smile touching her lips. If you don't control your own narrative, someone else will write a humiliating one for you. So what is the next project for the CEO of the world? Adrian asked. Eleanor opened a file on her tablet. It showed plans for a new initiative, the Global Scholars Exchange. It was a fellowship program designed to find and fund brilliant, often overlooked academics, particularly women and those from non-traditional backgrounds, and give them the tools and the platform of the Lawson Vance Archive. The digital objects are safe now, Eleanor said, looking at the plans. Now, we have to preserve the minds. We have to make sure that the next brilliant woman with a groundbreaking idea doesn't have to wait 20 years and a messy divorce to get the funding and the platform she deserves. That is the real legacy of Lawson Vance. She was not just archiving the masters of the past, she was enabling the masters of the future. The former dowdy and dull housewife, once dismissed by her controlling husband, was now quietly and systematically restructuring the global landscape of power. One grant, one scholarship, and one preserved artifact at a time. Her victory was complete, profound, and beautifully permanent. Eleanor has secured her place as a global leader. What name would you give to the first fellowship that Eleanor establishes through the new Global Scholars Exchange? Drop your ideas in the comments. If you were inspired by Eleanor's ultimate triumph, like, share, and subscribe for more stories of justice and ultimate success. Cảm ban. Tôi rất vui vì bạn đã đam mình vào câu chuyện đầy cảm hứng về Eleanor. The CEO's return. Destruction by indifference. 3 years later. The silent influence. It had been 3 years since the Geneva summit. The Lawson Vance archive was now a world power, not only in preservation, but in cultural policy. Eleanor's Global Scholars Exchange had quietly launched the careers of 24 brilliant, diverse academics, effectively changing the face of the conservation world. Eleanor was no longer defined by her past. She was simply Eleanor Vance, CEO. Her private life remained intentionally discreet. Her partnership with Adrian Lawson was not a fiery romance, but an extraordinary, mutual commitment built on intellectual respect, shared purpose, and quiet affection. They were two powerful minds working in tandem, the perfect union of vision and execution. One crisp autumn afternoon, Eleanor was back in London for the annual Royal Arts Foundation Gala, the same event where she had made her monumental return. This time, she wasn't an uninvited guest or a surprising reveal. She was the guest of honor, slated to announce the archive's most ambitious project yet, the digital reconstruction of an entire lost wing of the British Museum. Before the main event, she attended a small, private reception for the Board of Trustees in a side salon. She moved through the room with genuine warmth, speaking easily to former critics and new allies alike. And then, she saw Brenda Stafford. Brenda, the wife of Jason's former colleague William, was the very woman who had witnessed Jason's cruel dismissal of Eleanor as dowdy and dull on the Opera House steps. 3 years ago, Brenda had looked away, embarrassed, siding with the powerful Jason. Brenda, looking significantly older and less confident, approached Eleanor tentatively. "Eleanor, you look incredible. I never thought I'd see you here like this." Eleanor smiled softly. "It's a long way from my East London flat, Brenda, but the work is rewarding." Brenda leaned in conspiratorially, her voice hushed. "I have to ask, what really happened to Jason? My husband, William, was let go from Gala Capital 6 months after Jason's mess. They blamed the high-risk fund, but everyone knew it was the fallout from that night. The question, so direct and gossipy, forced Eleanor to confront the shadow that still lingered. Jason, I heard, took a management consulting job in the Cayman Islands, Eleanor stated calmly, giving only the public facts. But that's all I know. I haven't tracked his career, Brenda. Brenda sighed, a sound of bitter pity. He lost everything. The apartment, the cars, and Chloe left him within a week. It was all so dramatic. It was heartbreaking. Eleanor looked at Brenda, her eyes holding genuine sincerity, not malice. Brenda, the heartbreak was not the drama. The heartbreak was the 10 years that came before it, the years I poured my energy into his ambition instead of my own. That is the true tragedy of a life misspent. What happened at the gala was simply the public disclosure of a breakup that had occurred internally a decade prior. Eleanor did not seek to lecture or humiliate. She simply offered a quiet, profound truth. Brenda, Realizing the depth of her own superficiality and the magnitude of Eleanor's growth, simply nodded, wordlessly accepting the critique of her own life's choices. The last vestige of control. Later that evening, Adrian approached Eleanor with a sealed envelope. "This came through the Archives legal team today. It's from the liquidators of Gala Capital. It's a final, administrative cleanup," Adrian explained. "Remember the Honda Civic you kept after the divorce? The one Jason fought to keep the title to, just to control one last asset?" Eleanor remembered the pathetic tug-of-war over the old car, a final, petty act of control by Jason. "Yes, the blue one. It seems the final paperwork wasn't filed correctly when the firm's assets were liquidated. The courts found that, technically, the title to that old Honda should have reverted to Jason and been seized to pay his debts. They are now asking for a final signature from you, as his former spouse, to settle the ownership." Eleanor looked at the document. Final ownership of a 20 Honda Civic. It was the last, trivial connection to her ex-husband, a relic of her forgotten life. Adrian smiled slightly. "The liquidators have already informed Jason. He apparently sent an email demanding that they destroy the car rather than let you have it, claiming some form of final spite." Eleanor took the pen. She did not sign the document. Instead, she took out her personal checkbook, the one she used for minor expenses, and wrote a check. She handed it to Adrian. "Please instruct David Chen to finalize the ownership document, but not in my name." Adrian looked at the recipient line on the check. It was addressed to the Global Scholars Exchange. He looked at the amount, the exact residual value of the 2012 Honda Civic. "And what happens to the car?" he asked. "Instruct the liquidators to sell the Honda, use the proceeds to purchase this check from my private funds, and then donate the car to the Bright Futures Trust, the local charity that provides transport for single mothers returning to education," Eleanor instructed. "Jason will never know I made a single move on that car. He'll simply know that one last asset he tried to control is now completely out of his reach and is being used to help a woman secure her own freedom. He tried to control the asset, and in doing so, he forfeited the opportunity to contribute to a life beyond his own ego," Eleanor concluded. "That is the final, perfect justice." Adrian looked at the check and then at Eleanor. He didn't see the CEO of a global empire. He saw the profound integrity of the woman who had always understood that true value lies in liberation, not control. He took the check, kissed her cheek gently, and promised to execute the quiet maneuver perfectly. The real legacy, the restoration of self. Later that night, Eleanor was alone on the stage of the Royal Opera House, delivering her keynote. She spoke not of data points or algorithms, but of resilience and the sanctity of the human story. As she looked out at the powerful, captivated audience, she saw no trace of Jason Roth, no sign of the shame he had tried to inflict. She was surrounded only by the future she had built. The memory of her past was now nothing more than a faint, archived data point, a reference, but never again a definition. Her journey had not been a fairy tale of revenge, but a powerful, methodical restoration of a brilliant mind. She had been the masterpiece all along, hidden under layers of dullness and someone else's poor repainting. And now, she was fully revealed, shining with an elegance that was truly timeless. Eleanor has achieved complete peace and established her ultimate legacy. What phrase best sums up Eleanor Vance's philosophy on power? A. Control is everything. Or B. Liberation is the ultimate authority. Let us know your thoughts. If this story inspired you to reclaim your own narrative, like, share, and subscribe.